Rain fell over Portland like soft silver threads, coating the streets in quiet reflection. Inside a small cafe on Hawthorne Street, Ethan Parker sat near the window, pretending to work but mostly staring at the glass as raindrops slid down it like memories he couldn't erase. The coffee beside him had gone cold, but he didn't care. He'd been living on autopilot for months. Wake up, go to work, come home, repeat. His wife, Mia, had left nearly a year ago, saying she needed space, saying she didn't feel alive anymore. Ethan hadn't known how to respond. How do you argue with someone who says your life together feels like silence? The cafe was half empty, filled with the hum of quiet conversations and soft music from an old radio. Outside, people rushed by under umbrellas, their faces hidden and hurried. Ethan envied them. At least they had somewhere to be. He had only this seat, this coffee, and a hollow feeling he couldn't name. Then the door opened with a small chime, and a burst of cold air followed a woman inside. She was soaked from head to toe, clutching a broken umbrella that looked like it had fought a storm and lost. Still, she smiled a warm, unbothered smile. Like the rain didn't bother her at all. She went to the counter, ordered something with a laugh, and turned around looking for a place to sit. Every table was full except the one across from Ethan. Their eyes met for a second. She hesitated, then walked toward him. "Do you mind?" she asked, holding up her cup. "Everywhere else is taken." Her voice was calm but carried an easy confidence. Ethan gestured to the chair. "Go ahead." She sat down, brushing rain from her sleeves. "Portland weather," she said with a grin. "It's like living inside a cloud." Ethan smiled for the first time that day. "Yeah, it never really stops. I kind of like that," she said. "Makes you slow down. Makes you listen." They talked first about small things, then about nothing in particular. She introduced herself as Claire Holden, a freelance travel writer who'd just returned from the coast. She said she'd stopped in the cafe to escape the rain and finish an article she didn't feel like writing. Ethan told her he was an architect, though lately he felt more like a man drawing lines that went nowhere. Claire laughed easily, and it was the kind of laugh that filled the space between them. She had a way of turning ordinary topics into something light and genuine. They spoke about how the city always smelled like rain, how people carried books everywhere, how strangers sometimes felt safer to talk to than friends. Ethan found himself opening up more than he had in months. He told her about how he'd moved to Portland after college, how he'd built a quiet life that looked fine on the outside but felt empty on the inside. Claire didn't interrupt, didn't try to fix it. She just listened, sipping her coffee slowly. When he stopped talking, she looked at him for a long second and said, "Maybe life doesn't always need fixing. Maybe it just needs feeling." Ethan didn't know how to respond. Her words were simple, but they cut deep, like she had reached into the place where his silence lived and left a small light there outside. The rain began to fall harder, the sound wrapping the cafe in a soft rhythm. People hurried by, and yet time seemed to slow for them. It was as if the storm outside had pushed them into a pocket of calm. Ethan glanced at his watch, surprised by how quickly the hour had passed. Claire stood up, pulling her coat around her shoulders. "Well, I should go before it floods out there." He felt something inside him tighten, that quiet panic of knowing he didn't want the moment to end. "Will you come here again?" he asked before he could stop himself. She smiled. "Maybe. I like the coffee here." Then she hesitated, looked back at him with soft eyes, and said, "Sometimes. You just have to go with the flow, Ethan. Don't fight it so much." Before he could reply, she was gone, stepping into the rain, her silhouette fading into the gray street like a scene from a memory. Ethan sat there for a long time, staring at the chair she'd left empty. He didn't know why her words hit him so hard or why her name lingered in his mind. All he knew was that something inside him had shifted just slightly, just enough to make the world feel a little less heavy later that night as he walked home under the drizzle. He found himself thinking about her laugh, her calm voice, the way she looked at him as if she understood things he couldn't explain. He didn't even know if he'd see her again, but the thought of her gave him a quiet kind of comfort. When he got home, He opened his laptop and stared at the empty screen for a while. The cursor blinked, waiting for him to start something. And for the first time in months, he began to write, not an architectural plan, but words. Words about rain, about chance meetings, about a stranger who saw through the fog. He didn't know where the story was going, but that was fine. Maybe he didn't need to know. Maybe it was enough just to start. The next morning, he walked back to the same cafe, half hoping she'd be there, half telling himself not to expect it. The seat across from him stayed empty, but somehow it didn't feel lonely anymore. He looked out at the rain, still falling like yesterday hadn't ended, and smiled quietly to himself. He whispered the words she had said, letting them echo in his mind. Go with the flow. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt like he could. Weeks passed. But Ethan couldn't forget Claire Holden, the woman who walked into his quiet life like sunlight through gray clouds. Every morning he found himself back at the same cafe, pretending it was just for the coffee. But deep down he was waiting. Waiting for that same voice, that same smile that made everything feel alive again. He told himself it was silly, that she was just a stranger passing through. But something about her had left a mark he couldn't erase. Then one cold afternoon, when he'd almost given up, the bell above the cafe door chimed, and there she was. Same calm smile, same light in her eyes. She noticed him instantly. You again, she said, teasing. Ethan smiled. Or maybe it's you again. They both laughed, and just like that, the air between them warmed. They sat together, and conversation flowed easily, like they'd known each other for years. Claire told him she had been traveling for a few weeks, writing stories for a magazine. She spoke about small towns, ocean winds, and the way strangers sometimes showed you who you really were. Ethan listened like every word mattered. He didn't interrupt, didn't overthink. He just wanted to stay in that moment. Hearing her voice over the soft hum of the cafe after that day, it became routine. Every few evenings they would meet, sometimes planned, sometimes by chance. They walked through Portland's narrow streets after the rain, sharing an umbrella, talking about everything and nothing. The city looked different when she was beside him. The wet sidewalks shimmered brighter. The air smelled fresher. The nights felt alive. Claire was older than Ethan by a few years. She carried herself with quiet confidence, the kind that comes from surviving life's storms. She told stories about her mistakes, her travels, and her dreams. She wanted to open a small bookstore someday, a place filled with stories, coffee, and quiet laughter. Ethan found himself picturing it easily, as if he already belonged there. He noticed small things about her, how she always paused before crossing a street, how she looked up at the sky like it was talking to her, how her laughter could turn a dull evening into something memorable. She made him forget the weight of his past. For the first time in a long while, Ethan wasn't thinking about what he'd lost. He was thinking about what he was feeling. One evening, they met near the Willamette River. The rain had stopped, and the air smelled like wet earth. They walked along the path as the city lights shimmered across the water. Ethan looked at her, his heart calm yet restless. You make this place feel new, he said quietly. Claire smiled but didn't look at him. It's not the place, Ethan. It's you learning to breathe again. They stopped near the railing where the light hit her face softly. You think too much, she said. About the past. About what could go wrong. Life isn't a problem to solve. It's a flow to follow. He looked at her, unsure what to say. She turned, facing him fully now, and whispered, Go with the flow. I'm enjoying this. The words felt simple, but they carried something deeper, an unspoken closeness, a kind of peace he hadn't felt in years. Ethan didn't need to answer. They stood there quietly, watching the city move, the river breathing beneath them. And for once, silence felt right. After that night, things changed, not in a dramatic way, but in small, real moments. They started sharing more of their lives. Claire introduced him to her favorite bookstore downtown, a cozy place filled with secondhand novels and old jazz music. Ethan told her about the building projects he worked on, though he admitted that designing felt empty lately. She encouraged him to draw for himself again, not for clients, but for the joy of creation. They spent hours together, walking, laughing, and learning to exist without labels. It wasn't about romance, not yet. It was something gentler, a connection built on understanding and calm energy. Still, beneath their friendship, something quiet was growing. Something both of them felt but didn't dare name. Ethan began to notice her differently. The way her fingers brushed her hair when she laughed, the way her eyes softened when she looked at him too long, and sometimes he caught her watching him with a faint sadness. Like she knew something he didn't, but she never explained and he never asked. One weekend they took a drive to the coast. The wind was wild, the ocean gray and restless. Claire stood barefoot on the sand, letting the waves touch her feet. Ethan watched her. She looked alive, fearless, almost glowing. "I always come here when I need to think," she said. "The sea reminds me that everything keeps moving, no matter what." Ethan nodded. "You talk about life like it's a story you already understand." She smiled faintly. "Maybe I've just learned to stop fighting the plot." They spent the evening watching the sun sink behind the waves. Ethan wanted to tell her how much she had changed him, how her presence made everything lighter, but he didn't. Some feelings didn't need words. They lived quietly in the spaces between. As they drove back to the city, she leaned her head against the window, eyes closed, humming softly to an old song on the radio. Ethan looked at her reflection in the glass, peaceful, gentle, almost untouchable, and realized that whatever this was, it mattered. Days later, back in the city, they returned to their usual walks. Claire continued to talk about her dreams, her favorite books, her plans for the bookstore. Ethan found himself imagining helping her build it, imagining a life where rain and laughter belonged in the same space. He didn't know if it was love, not yet, but it felt like something close. One evening, as they walked along this same river path, the sky dimming into gold and gray, Ethan felt that urge again to tell her what she meant to him. But before he could, she said quietly, "You're learning, Ethan. I can see it." He smiled. "Learning what?" "To let go," she said softly. "To stop holding on to what hurt you. That's how you start living again." They stopped by the railing again, the same spot where she'd told him to go with the flow weeks ago. The city lights shimmered in her eyes, and for a moment, Ethan forgot the noise of the world. Everything slowed. Claire turned to him, her smile tender. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "You don't even realize it, but you're changing." Ethan wanted to ask what she meant, why her voice sounded almost sad. But she reached out, gently touched his arm and said, "Just keep flowing, okay? Don't force anything. I'm enjoying this. The now they come. Promise me you will too." He nodded, though his heart felt tight. She smiled again, that same warm, fleeting smile, and walked ahead as the streetlights flickered on one by one. Ethan followed, quietly, feeling that somewhere between rain and laughter, between strangers and something more, his life had started again. Autumn arrived quietly in Portland, turning the streets gold and red. The air carried that soft chill that made people walk closer together. But for Ethan Parker and Claire Holden, it felt like the perfect season for long talks and slow walks. By now, they had become a regular sight around the city, always together, sharing coffee, laughter, and moments that didn't need explaining. To anyone watching, they looked like two people in love. But to Ethan, it was still a mystery. Claire was warm and open, yet there was always something distant in her eyes. Like she carried a secret that she wasn't ready to share. One evening, they met at their usual cafe, and Claire looked different. She was smiling, but her face was pale and her hands trembled slightly as she stirred her drink. Ethan noticed. "You okay?" he asked. She hesitated before answering. "Just tired. Been writing too much lately." He nodded, though something inside him felt uneasy. She talked about how work had been stressful, how she wanted to take a small break soon. "Maybe disappear for a bit," she said softly. Ethan tried to laugh it off. "Disappear? That's dramatic." She smiled weakly. "Maybe that's exactly what I need." Their walks continued. Though Ethan began to notice small changes, the way she'd stop mid-sentence as if she forgot what she was saying, or how she'd look away when he asked too many questions. Still, he didn't push. He was afraid to break whatever peace they had built. Sometimes love wasn't about knowing everything, it was about holding on. It's the moments that felt right. But the distance between them grew quietly. One night they were walking along the Willamette River, the same path where she'd once told him to go with the flow. The city lights shimmered on the water, and Claire leaned against the railing, looking thoughtful. "You ever feel like you're running out of time?" she asked suddenly. Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" She looked at him, her eyes softer than he'd ever seen them. "Sometimes I feel like I'm racing something I can't see. Like I'm trying to do everything before it's too late." Her words hit him with quiet fear. "Claire, what are you talking about?" But she only smiled, brushing his question away. "Nothing serious. Just my head getting dramatic again." Then she turned the conversation toward him, asking about his new project, his drawings, anything that would shift attention away from her that night. When they said goodbye, she hugged him tighter than usual. "Don't lose yourself again, okay?" she whispered. Ethan stood there after she walked away, watching her disappear into the night rain. Something about that moment felt final, though he couldn't explain why. The next morning, she didn't answer his message. Or the next. Or the one after that. Days passed. He went to the cafe, hoping she'd walk in like before, but her seat stayed empty. He checked the bookstore she loved, even asked the barista if they'd seen her. Nobody had. Ethan tried to stay calm. Maybe she had gone on a trip. Maybe she just needed space. But deep down, fear was blooming, quiet but strong. He couldn't stop thinking about her pale face, her tired voice, the way she'd said she was running out of time. A week later, while cleaning his desk, he found a small book she'd once lent him, The Art of Stillness. Inside, tucked between the pages, was a folded note. His heart stopped as he unfolded it. "Ethan, if you're reading this, it means I didn't know how to say goodbye in person. I didn't want sadness to be the last thing you remembered about me. There's something I never told you, something I tried to keep hidden because I wanted our days to be light, not heavy. I've been sick for a while. Nothing sudden, nothing dramatic, just something quietly growing that I can't control. I thought I had more time, but I can feel it catching up. Please don't be angry. Meeting you was never part of a plan, but it became the best part of my story. You made me laugh again. You reminded me what it felt like to be seen, not as someone broken, but as someone alive. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to turn what we had into waiting for goodbye. Don't come looking for me. Just remember the laughter, the rain, the coffee. Go with the flow. Promise me that." Claire, the note blurred as Ethan's eyes filled with tears. He sat there in silence, reading it again and again, trying to understand how the world could keep moving when something inside him had stopped. She hadn't left out of indifference. She had left to protect him, to protect their happiness from turning into grief. That night, Ethan walked back to the Riverwalk where they'd last stood together. The rain returned, gentle and steady. He stood under it without an umbrella, feeling every drop like a memory. He whispered her name, not expecting an answer, just needing to say it out loud. Days turned into weeks. Ethan tried to focus on work, on life. But everything reminded him of her. The bookstore, the sound of rain, the smell of coffee. But slowly her words began to guide him. Go with the flow. She had wanted him to keep moving, to keep living. He started sketching again, not for clients but for himself. Drawings of the city, the cafe, and a woman standing by the river. Her hair caught in the wind. He framed one of those sketches and placed it by his desk. Underneath it, he wrote the words she'd left him. Go with the flow. One evening, as autumn began to fade into winter, Ethan visited the river again. The city lights shimmered the way they always did, and he felt something he hadn't felt in a while. Peace. The pain was still there, but softer now, mixed with gratitude. Claire had come into his life for a reason, not to stay forever, but to remind him that life was worth feeling again, as he watched the river move beneath the bridge. He whispered softly, I'm still going with the flow. Claire. A small smile crossed his face. one that carried both sadness and love, the kind of smile that comes when you finally accept that some stories don't end. They just change form. He turned and walked home through the drizzle, knowing that somewhere, somehow, she would have wanted that for him to keep moving, to keep feeling, to keep living. And in that quiet moment, beneath the Portland rain, Ethan realized that love doesn't always stay beside you. Sometimes it lives in you quietly, endlessly, like a heartbeat you never stop hearing. Winter came quietly to Portland, wrapping the city in a gray calm that felt both beautiful and lonely. Months had passed since Claire Holden disappeared from Ethan Parker's life. But she was still everywhere, in the smell of coffee, in the sound of rain, in the quiet spaces between his thoughts. Her absence had left a silence he had learned to live with, but never to forget. Some days it hurt. Other days it felt like a soft ache he carried with pride. She had changed him. He was no longer the man sitting in a cafe lost in regret. He was someone who had learned to feel again, even through loss. One cold morning, Ethan walked downtown to clear his head. He had started sketching again, even teaching part-time at a local design school. Life was slow but steady, the kind of rhythm Claire would have called flow. As he turned a corner near Burnside Street, something caught his eye. A brand new bookstore had opened, a small, cozy place with warm lights and a hand-painted sign above the door. Flow and Feather Books and Coffee. He froze. His heart thudded once, twice. That name, it was something Claire had said often. Go with the flow. And Feather was what she used to call the pages of her favorite books. Ethan stepped closer, staring at the window display filled with secondhand novels and little plants. For a moment, he couldn't move. His hands were shaking. He pushed the door open, and a soft bell chimed, the same sound he remembered from the cafe where he first met her inside. The air smelled of roasted coffee and new beginnings. Shelves lined the walls, filled with books that looked loved and carefully chosen. A young woman stood behind the counter, arranging a stack of journals. She looked up and smiled warmly. "Welcome. You must be Ethan." He blinked in surprise. "I'm sorry. Do I know you?" The woman laughed softly and handed him a sealed envelope. "Not exactly. But Claire told me about you. She said if you ever came by, I should give you this." Ethan's breath caught. His fingers trembled as he took the letter. He looked around again, the small corner cafe inside, the cozy chairs, the framed photos of rainy streets. It all felt like her. He sat at a corner table, their kind of table, and opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter, neat but slightly uneven, like it had been written slowly. "Dear Ethan, if you're reading this, it means you found the bookstore. And yes, it's real. It's mine. Or maybe ours in a way. You once said I should open a place where people could read, dream, and breathe. I never forgot that. I'm writing this from a quiet hospital room, though by the time you read it, I'll be somewhere calmer. Don't be sad. My story isn't ending, it's just changing chapters. You were a part of the best one. When we met, you were lost and I was scared. But together, we found stillness in the storm. You taught me that love doesn't need promises. Sometimes it just needs presence. I wanted to leave something behind that carried that peace. This bookstore is that piece of peace. Every detail here is something we talked about. The river photos, the rain quotes, even the name, Flow and Feather. You inspired it, Ethan. Don't stop living. Keep designing. Keep walking in the rain. Keep loving, even if it hurts sometimes. You'll find a key in this envelope. It's for the small studio upstairs. I wanted you to use it. Paint, draw, write. Whatever helps you stay close to life. If you ever wonder whether I loved you, I did. Deeply, quietly, always. Claire, the words blurred through his tears. Ethan sat there, motionless, the letter trembling in his hands. The bookstore around him seemed to hum softly, as if it recognized him. It felt like she was there in the light, in the warmth, in the faint scent of lavender she had always worn. After a while, he stood and walked slowly around the shop. There were small touches everywhere, a coffee cup collection from her travels, a framed photo of the coast, even a wall labeled Claire's Corner with books she loved. At the counter, the young woman said quietly, "She talked about you often. Said you reminded her that love could be calm, not complicated." Ethan smiled faintly, holding back tears. That sounds like her. He spent hours in the shop that day, reading bits of old books, sipping coffee, and letting the past and present blend together. When he finally climbed the narrow stairs to the small studio, he found it exactly as Claire described, a wooden desk by the window, a few art supplies, and one more note taped to the wall. "For when you need to start again." He ran his hand over the paper and sat at the desk. Outside, the rain had started again, soft and steady, tapping against the glass like an old friend. Ethan opened his sketchbook and began to draw the river, the cafe, her smile. Each line felt like a heartbeat, each shape like a memory taking form. He didn't know how long he sat there, but when he looked up, the city lights glowed across the wet streets. And he felt something peaceful, not the absence of pain, but the presence of meaning. Over the next few months, the bookstore became part of his life. He helped the staff decorate, hosted reading nights, and designed posters for the shop's window. People came, drawn by the warmth of the place, unaware that it had been born from love and goodbye. Ethan would often sit by the window with a cup of coffee, watching the rain the same way he had that first day. Sometimes, when the wind passed through the open door, he could almost hear her voice, soft, calm, saying the words that had changed everything. "Go with the flow. I'm enjoying this." Years later, the bookstore thrived. People said it had a strange kind of peace about it, like every corner held a quiet story. And in that little upstairs studio, Ethan kept drawing, his sketches filling the walls with images of rain, rivers, and a woman who smiled like sunshine breaking through clouds. He never forgot her, but he didn't live in the past anymore. He carried her lessons instead. That love doesn't have to last forever to matter forever. That some people come into your life not to stay, but to awaken something inside you. One rainy afternoon, a young couple entered the shop. The woman pointed at a framed quote near the counter. It read, "Sometimes love means letting go, and sometimes it means learning to flow." Ethan, now older and gentler, looked up from his desk and smiled at them. "That's exactly right," he said. When they left, he turned back to the window. The rain was falling softly again, and for a brief moment, he whispered, "Claire, I kept my promise. I went with the flow." Outside, a faint breeze lifted the pages of a book near the window, and though he knew it was just the wind, it felt like an answer. He smiled to himself, took another sip of coffee, and let the rain play its quiet rhythm. The world had moved on, but in that bookstore, love still lingered, not loud, not desperate, just real. And in that gentle silence, Ethan finally understood some endings are just beginnings, written in softer ink.